The helicopter touched down in a cloud of Afghan dust, and Gunnery Sergeant Alair Massadeh stepped onto the landing zone at Forward Operating Base Kogyani, knowing she would be hated within the hour. 12 years in Marine Corps had taught her to read a base temperature before anyone spoke a word, and this one ran cold. The eyes tracking her from the guard post held the particular contempt reserved for outsiders, the kind that said you do not belong here, and we will make sure you know it. She adjusted the strap of her pack and walked toward the command post with the measured pace of someone who had learned that arriving too eager invited predators. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Perhaps you have witnessed someone being underestimated in your community. Master Sergeant Cade Rennick met her at the operations building with a clipboard and an expression that suggested he had already decided everything he needed to know about her. He stood 6'2", with shoulders built from years of carrying combat loads, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved specifically for issuing commands nobody would question. He glanced at her paperwork without reading it. "Cultural Support Team Attachment," he said. His voice carried the kind of dismissal that turned words into weapons. "We requested additional shooters, and they sent us a liaison." Alara kept her expression neutral. "Gunnery Sergeant Massadeh, reporting as ordered, Master Sergeant." Rennick looked past her like she had already ceased to exist. He shouted across the compound at a young Marine who was struggling with an equipment case. The Lance Corporal, barely 20 years old with the terrified eyes of someone fresh from training, fumbled the case and sent its contents scattering across the dirt. "Volkov!" Rennick bellowed. He crossed the distance in 4 strides. "You drop government property one more time, and I will have you burning waste for the rest of your deployment. Pick it up, now." The young Marine scrambled on his hands and knees, grabbing components while his face burned red. Other Marines watched from doorways and vehicle bays, none moving to help. That was how it worked. You did not intervene when Rennick chose a target. Alara set down her pack. She walked to where a battery pack had rolled beneath a generator, retrieved it, and handed it to Volkov without a word. Their eyes met briefly. She gave him the smallest nod, the kind that said you are not alone in this, even if it feels that way, and returned to her pack before Rennick finished his inspection of the scattered equipment. Rennick noticed. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing about it. Instead, he pointed toward a row of plywood structures at the far edge of the compound. "Your quarters are in Building 7. Supply runs happen at 0600. You either make yourself useful or you stay out of the way. We clear?" "Clear, Master Sergeant." She gathered her gear and walked toward Building 7. The structure sat closest to the burn pit and the latrine, positioned where the smell would be worst and the generator noise loudest. A message delivered without words. She had received similar messages before, in other places, from other men who believed they already knew everything about her. The quarters held 4 bunks, but only one showed signs of occupation. A female staff sergeant looked up from a worn paperback as Alara entered. She had intelligent eyes, dark skin, and the cautious posture of someone who had learned to measure every interaction at this FOB. "Let me guess," the staff sergeant said. "Rennick gave you the welcome speech about making yourself useful." Word for word. The woman set down her book. "Staff Sergeant Yolanda Preacher. I have been here 3 months. Still waiting to be considered useful by his definition." Alara took the bunk farthest from the door, a position that offered sightlines to both the entrance and the single window. Old habits. She began unpacking her gear with methodical precision. Preacher watched her. "That is not how admin personnel arrange their kit," she observed. Alara paused for half a second, then continued. "Spent some time at different postings. You pick things up." Through the thin walls, they could hear Rennick still addressing Marines in the compound, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority that came from never being challenged. Preacher returned to her book, but her eyes stayed on Alara, cataloging details, asking questions she was too smart to voice out loud. That night, Alara walked the perimeter of the FOB. She told the guards she needed to learn the layout. What she actually needed was to understand sight lines, dead zones, and the rhythm of how this base breathed after dark. She noted the sniper position on the east tower, the gap in coverage near the vehicle bay, and the way sound carried differently across the compound, depending on wind direction. She passed a group of Marines cleaning weapons outside their quarters. Their conversation stopped when she approached and resumed when she passed. One of them muttered something about support personnel that drew quiet laughter from the others. Near the command post, she paused. Through the window, she could see Rennick studying a map with Captain Brennan, the FOB commander. Rennick pointed at something and Brennan nodded. Whatever they were planning, it involved the routes heading east toward the mountain passes. Alara returned to Building 7. Preacher was asleep, her breathing steady and deep. Alara sat on her bunk in the darkness and disassembled her rifle by feel alone, her fingers moving with a speed and precision that had nothing to do with cultural liaison training. She reassembled it in under a minute, checked the action 3 times, and placed it within arm's reach of her pillow. Outside, boots crunched on gravel. 2 Marines passed her building, their voices low. "Did you see how she handled that rifle earlier?" one of them said, when she was checking her gear at the pad. The other Marine made a dismissive sound. "Probably just showing off. Those support types always want to look like they belong." "No," the first Marine insisted. "That was muscle memory. That was thousands of hours. My instructor at Pendleton did not move that clean." Their footsteps faded into the Afghan night. Alara lay back on her bunk and stared at the plywood ceiling. Tomorrow Rennick would send her on a supply run through hostile territory, expecting her to fail or freeze or prove every assumption he had already made. He would be watching for weakness, because weakness was all he knew how to see. He was going to be disappointed. The morning briefing confirmed everything Alara had suspected about Master Sergeant Rennick. He stood at the front of the operations room addressing 15 Marines, while she and Preacher occupied folding chairs against the back wall, physically separated from the rest of the unit like contamination that needed containing. "Patrol route takes us through Sector 7 today," Rennick said, pointing at the map. "Intelligence suggests minimal activity, but we stay sharp." He glanced toward the back of the room. "Support personnel remain with the vehicles during any dismounted operations. They are not trained for direct engagement, and I will not have liability on my conscience." Preacher's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Alara watched Rennick's hands as he spoke, noting the way his fingers pressed harder against the map when he mentioned casualties from a previous patrol. There was something personal buried in his operational briefings, something that drove his contempt beyond simple prejudice. After the briefing, the Marines dispersed to prepare their equipment. Alara found Preacher outside the armory, checking her rifle with aggressive precision. "He has been like this since you arrived?" Alara asked, "or before?" Preacher seated a magazine and released it, checking the action. "Before. 3 months of being told I am a liability. 3 months of being assigned to vehicle duty while the men clear buildings." She looked up, "But it got worse about 6 weeks ago. Something happened. He does not talk about it, but the other Marines whisper." "What do they say?" "That his brother served here, at this FOB." Preacher lowered her voice. "That his brother did not make it home." Alara filed that information away. Grief twisted people in predictable ways. It found targets that made the pain feel purposeful, enemies that gave shape to formless loss. Rennick had decided that anyone he perceived as weak threatened the Marines under his command, and that belief had calcified into something immovable. The patrol staged at 0700. Alara took her position in the second vehicle, wedged between ammunition cases and water supplies, her rifle across her knees. The convoy rolled through the FOB gates and into the Afghan countryside, a landscape of brown hills and distant mountains that looked beautiful until you learned how many ways it could kill you. 40 minutes into the patrol, the convoy halted at a small village. Rennick ordered dismount for the riflemen, while Alara and Preacher remained with the vehicles as instructed. Through the dusty window, Alara watched the Marines move through the village, their movements professional but not exceptional. She noted the rooftop they failed to check, the alley they cleared too quickly, the pattern in their formation that a competent enemy could exploit. Movement caught her eye. A man on the eastern ridge, there for half a second and then gone. She reached for her radio to report it, then stopped. Rennick would dismiss her observation. Worse, he would use it as evidence that support personnel panicked at shadows. She watched the ridge for another 3 minutes. The figure did not reappear. Perhaps it had been nothing. Perhaps it had been a shepherd. Or perhaps someone was mapping their patrol routes, and she had just let them do it because speaking up meant being dismissed. The convoy returned to FOB Kogyani without incident. Alara spent the afternoon in the motor pool, helping with vehicle maintenance, a task that kept her hands busy while her mind worked through tactical problems that were not hers to solve. Lance Corporal Volkov found her there, approaching with the nervous energy of someone working up courage. "Gunnery Sergeant," he said. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching. "I wanted to thank you for yesterday with the equipment." Alara wiped grease from her hands. "You would have managed fine without help." "No," Volkov said. "I would not have, and nobody else would have helped." He hesitated. "Rennick, he is hard on everyone, but he is harder on some. I have seen how he treats you and Staff Sergeant Preacher. It is not right." Alara studied the young Marine. 19, maybe 20 years old, still carrying the openness that combat would eventually close. He reminded her of someone she had known years ago, another young Marine who had believed in fairness until the world taught him otherwise. "Keep your head down and do your job well," she told him. "The rest works itself out eventually." "Does it?" She did not answer because the honest answer was not always, and sometimes the people who deserve recognition never receive it, and sometimes the wrong people take credit, and sometimes you spend years being invisible because visible meant dead. That night Alara dreamed of Marja. The dream was always the same: darkness and gunfire and the weight of a wounded Marine across her shoulders. 7 of them had not made it out. She had carried 3 others to safety one at a time, while enemy rounds snapped past her head, and still 7 had died because she could not move fast enough, could not be in enough places at once, could not stop the ambush that should never have happened. She woke gasping, her hand reaching for a rifle that was exactly where she had left it. The plywood walls of Building 7 materialized around her. Afghanistan, not Marja. 2 years later, different FOB, same war. Preacher was watching her from the other bunk. "Bad dream," Alara said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Must have been." Preacher did not look away. "You were speaking, giving commands. Coordinates." "Alara, that is not admin terminology." The silence stretched between them. Alara could lie. She had been lying for 2 years, wearing a cover identity like a second skin, pretending to be someone smaller than she was because smaller meant safe. "I have been in difficult situations before," she said finally. "You learn things." Preacher sat up slowly. In the dim light filtering through the window, her eyes moved to Alara's arm where the sleeve had ridden up during sleep. Scars there, pale lines against brown skin, the kind that came from shrapnel and field surgery. "Those are not difficult situation scars," Preacher said quietly. "Those are combat scars. Close combat. The kind where you see faces." Alara pulled her sleeve down. "We should get some sleep. Morning comes early." Preacher lay back on her bunk, but her eyes stayed open, staring at the ceiling, processing information that did not fit the story she had been told. Alara knew that look. It was the look of someone who had just realized they were sharing quarters with a question mark. The alarm came at 0400. Not the morning wake-up call, but the urgent 3-tone burst that meant all hands to the operations center immediately. Alara and Preacher arrived to find Captain Brennan standing before a hastily assembled group of Marines, his face grave in the fluorescent lighting. Rennick stood beside him looking like a man who had just received news he did not want. "Intelligence update," Brennan announced. "Satellite imagery and local sources confirm a significant enemy force has massed along our primary supply route. Estimates suggest 40 to 60 fighters with heavy weapons capability." The room went still. Those numbers meant a coordinated ambush, professional and planned, the kind that turned supply convoys into kill boxes. "Tomorrow's resupply run just became a combat operation," Brennan continued. "We move at 0600 with full tactical posture." Rennick's eyes found Alara across the room. In his expression, she saw challenge and dismissal and something else, something that looked almost like anticipation. He wanted her to fail. He wanted proof that his beliefs about support personnel were correct. He spoke without breaking eye contact with her. Let's see what the cultural support team can do when things get real. Alara prepared for the patrol in the gray light before dawn, her movements automatic and precise. She checked her rifle 3 times, verified her magazine count, inspected her plate carrier for proper fit, and arranged her kit so that every item could be reached without looking. The Marines around her went through similar routines, but slower, less systematic, the difference between training and instinct. Rennick appeared at her vehicle as she finished. He looked at her gear, and something flickered across his face, recognition of competence that he quickly buried. "You ride in the 3rd vehicle," he said. "Tail position. If contact happens, you stay with the truck and provide rear security. Do not advance. Do not engage unless directly threatened. Understood?" Tail position was the most exposed spot in a convoy ambush. The kill zone always started at the rear, where vehicles could not accelerate forward to escape. Rennick knew this. He was either testing her or hoping she would become a casualty that proved his point. "Understood, Master Sergeant." The convoy rolled out at 0600 sharp. For vehicles carrying 18 Marines, plus Alara and Preacher, moving through terrain that funneled them into predictable routes between rocky hills. Perfect ambush country. Alara watched the ridgelines through her window, reading the landscape the way others read words on a page. 40 minutes into the movement, she saw it. A glint on the eastern slope, there and gone. Then another on the western ridge. Coordinated positioning. Someone was tracking them. She keyed her radio. Tailgunner to lead. Possible observation posts on both ridges. Eastern slope, 200 meters from the rock formation. Western ridge, near the dead tree. Recommend we alter route. Static. Then Rennick's voice, dismissive and cold. Tailgunner, maintain radio discipline. We are not changing route based on shadows. Alara bit back her response. Beside her, Preacher had gone tense, her eyes now scanning the same ridgelines. "You see something?" Preacher asked quietly. 2 spotters minimum. Professional positioning. They have been tracking us since the last checkpoint. Should we say something else? Alara shook her head. He will not listen. Just be ready. The convoy continued forward into the narrowing valley. Alara shifted her rifle to a ready position, her thumb resting near the safety. The other Marines in her vehicle noticed and exchanged glances. 3 minutes later, the first RPG streaked down from the western ridge. The explosion hit the lead vehicle's engine block, stopping the convoy dead. Automatic weapons fire erupted from both ridges, rounds pinging off armor and shattering windows. The ambush was exactly where Alara had predicted, executed exactly as she had feared. Contact left and right, someone shouted over the radio. Rennick's voice cut through the chaos, ordering dismount and return fire. Alara moved before conscious thought. She exited the vehicle on the protected side, brought her rifle up, and began identifying targets. The enemy fighters were well concealed, but not invisible. Muzzle flashes gave away positions. She tracked one, led the target, and fired twice. The muzzle flash stopped. Preacher dropped beside her, firing controlled bursts at the western ridge. The ambush was not overwhelming. Maybe 12 to 15 fighters, a harassment force rather than a full assault. They wanted to test the convoy's response, probe for weaknesses. Alara moved to better cover, her body staying low, her movements economical. A fighter broke from concealment to reposition, and she dropped him with a single shot at 300 meters. Another tried to advance down the slope, and she put 2 rounds center mass before he made it 10 feet. Around her, Marines were fighting back effectively. The initial shock had passed, and training took over. Rennick was coordinating fire teams, his command sharp and professional despite the chaos. Whatever his flaws, he knew combat. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. The enemy fighters withdrew when it became clear the ambush had failed to achieve surprise. No Marine casualties, though the lead vehicle was disabled and would need towing. In the aftermath, Alara helped establish a security perimeter while the convoy reorganized. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. She had fired 7 rounds, and was reasonably certain all 7 had found their targets. Sergeant Ottera, a compact rifleman with intelligent eyes, approached her during the lull. He had been in the vehicle ahead of hers, close enough to watch her engagement. "Gunnery Sergeant," he said carefully, "that was some shooting back there." "We got lucky," Ilera replied. They were not expecting resistance. Ottera did not look convinced, but he nodded and moved away. The convoy reached a small village 2 hours later, stopping to assess damage and gather intelligence. Ilera stayed with the vehicles as ordered while Marines questioned locals about enemy movements. Through the open window, she could hear the interpreter, Corporal Nazreen Qadri, struggling to communicate with an elderly villager whose dialect differed from standard Dari. Without thinking, Ilera stepped out of the vehicle and approached. She spoke to the old man directly, her Dari flowing in the specific dialect of Helmand province, asking about water sources and family connections and the things that mattered in village life before working toward questions about the men in the mountains. The old man's face changed. He began talking freely, sharing information about fighter movements, supply routes, a commander who had arrived 2 weeks ago from Pakistan. Ilera listened, asked follow-up questions, and thanked him in the formal manner his generation expected. When she turned around, Corporal Qadri was staring at her. So was Rennick. "Where did you learn that?" Rennick demanded. His voice was quiet, which was somehow more dangerous than shouting. "Language training," Ilera said. "It is part of the cultural support curriculum." That was not classroom Dari. Qadri's voice held confusion and something like awe. That was native fluency, regional dialect. "You spoke to him like you grew up in this province." Rennick stepped closer. His eyes were drilling into her now, trying to see past the surface. "What else did they teach you in cultural support, Gunnery Sergeant?" Ilera met his gaze without flinching. "Whatever was necessary, Master Sergeant." He held her stare for a long moment, then turned and walked back to the convoy. But she could see the questions multiplying behind his eyes, the certainty of his assumptions beginning to crack. That night, back at FOB Kogyani, Ilera heard voices outside Building 7. 2 Marines talking in low tones, unaware she was listening through the thin walls. "I am telling you," one of them said. "I served with a guy at Camp Pendleton who talked about this female operator. A ghost. Someone who did not officially exist." "Those are just stories," the other Marine replied. "Legends. Like the one about the sniper they called Iron Wolf. Supposedly took out an entire enemy command element single-handed. My buddy swore it was real. Said she was killed 2 years ago on some classified operation. Even if she was real, she is dead now. What does it matter?" Their footsteps faded into the darkness. Ilera sat motionless on her bunk, her heart beating steady and slow, the name she had not heard spoken aloud in 2 years echoing in the silence. Iron Wolf. Some ghosts were harder to bury than others. The morning briefing carried a different weight than before. Yesterday's ambush had changed the atmosphere at FOB Kogyani, replacing complacency with the sharp awareness that came from being reminded the enemy was real and close and hunting. Captain Brennan stood before the assembled Marines with new intelligence spread across the tactical display. "The fighters who hit us yesterday were a screening element," he said. "Main force is estimated at 60 plus, dug into positions along the Kajaki corridor. Command wants us to push a resupply convoy through tomorrow to the outpost at Firebase Phoenix." Ilera studied the map from her position at the back of the room. The route threaded through a valley she recognized, terrain features burned into her memory from satellite imagery she had memorized 2 years ago. Her stomach tightened. Rennick outlined the convoy composition and movement plan. Standard formation for vehicles, heavy weapons mounted. "We push through fast and do not stop for anything short of a disabled vehicle." Ilera raised her hand. The room went quiet. Rennick's eyes narrowed. "Something to add, Gunnery Sergeant?" "The route passes through a natural choke point at grid reference 47. Ilera kept her voice professional and calm. "High ground on 3 sides, limited maneuver space, single egress route. If the enemy has any tactical competence, that is where they will mass their ambush. I recommend we approach from the northern route instead. It adds 2 hours, but eliminates the kill zone." Rennick stared at her. The northern route has not been cleared in 3 weeks. We have no current intelligence on enemy positions there. We have no current intelligence suggesting it is more dangerous than driving into an obvious ambush site. The silence stretched. Marines exchanged glances, uncertain whose side to take. Rennick's jaw tightened. The route stands as planned. We move fast, maintain firepower superiority, and push through before they can coordinate. That is how Marines operate. He paused. Unless the cultural support team has taken over tactical planning while I was not informed. Scattered laughter from Marines. Alara said nothing. She had made her point. Pushing further would only entrench his position. Brennan dismissed the briefing, but caught Alara's eye as she moved toward the door. Gunnery Sergeant. A word. She followed him to his office, a plywood box barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs. Brennan closed the door and studied her with the evaluating gaze of a commander who had learned to read people under pressure. That was a solid tactical assessment, he said. Better than solid. That was the kind of analysis I expect from officers with years of combat planning experience. I pay attention, sir. Brennan leaned against his desk. Your file says cultural support team, language specialist, community liaison. He picked up a folder. But I've been doing this job long enough to know when a file does not match the person standing in front of me. Alara kept her expression neutral. I'm not sure what you mean, Captain. Yesterday, you engaged enemy fighters with accuracy rates that would qualify you for Scout Sniper School. Today, you identified tactical vulnerabilities in terrain you supposedly have never seen before. And Corporal Cattery tells me you speak Dari like you were born in Helmand Province. He set the folder down. Who are you really, Gunnery Sergeant Mossadegh? I'm exactly who my orders say I am, sir. Brennan held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be difficult. She left his office knowing that her cover was developing cracks. Too many eyes watching now. Too many questions accumulating. The ghost she had been for 2 years was becoming visible whether she wanted it or not. That evening, Preacher found her behind the motor pool, cleaning her rifle in the fading light. You know, Preacher said, settling onto an ammunition crate beside her. There are stories Marines tell each other. Legends about operators who do not officially exist. Alara continued her cleaning, her hands steady. What kind of stories? Preacher pulled out a cigarette and lit it. About a female Marine who went through training no woman was supposed to complete. Scout Sniper School. Then something even more classified. Preacher exhaled smoke into the cooling air. They called her Iron Wolf. Alara's hands did not pause. Sounds like a recruiting myth. Maybe. Preacher watched her carefully. The story goes she was part of some special operations unit. Did things that never made official reports. Took out a Taliban commander in Pakistan that nobody could get close to. Save an entire platoon during an ambush by calling in danger close air support on her own position. And what happened to her? Preacher was quiet for a moment. Story says she died 2 years ago. Some classified operation that went wrong. They never recovered a body, but she was listed as killed in action. Alara finished reassembling her rifle and worked the action twice. If she is dead, why are Marines still telling stories about her? Because some people are too stubborn to stay dead. Preacher ground out her cigarette. And because the women coming up after her need to know that someone broke through the walls, even if she did not survive it. The weight of those words settled over Alara like a physical thing. She had not thought about what her supposed death meant to others. She had only thought about survival, about the mission, about the necessity of disappearing to protect operations and sources and the lives that depended on enemies believing she no longer existed. That night, she sat alone in the operations center, studying intelligence reports while the FOB slept. Something in the pattern of enemy movements bothered her. The positions they were taking, the timing of their reinforcements, the specific terrain they were fortifying. She pulled up archived imagery and compared it to current positions. The correlation made her blood run cold. The enemy was not just preparing an ambush. They were recreating the exact tactical setup that had been used 2 years ago in Operation Crimson Dawn. The same terrain, the same approach vectors. The same kill zone where 7 Marines had died under her command. Someone knew. Someone remembered. And they were waiting. Alara stared at the map, her hands flat on the table, her breathing carefully controlled. Tomorrow's convoy would pass through the exact location where she had watched friends die, where she had carried bodies through gunfire, where she had earned a call sign by doing things that still woke her screaming in the night. The mountains on the screen looked peaceful in the satellite imagery, but she knew what waited there. She knew what those valleys could become when the shooting started. The last time she had been there, 7 Marines came home in boxes. This time would be different. It had to be. The convoy rolled out at 0530 under a sky just beginning to lighten. Alara sat in the tail vehicle again, watching the mountains grow larger through the dusty windshield. Every ridge and valley matched the topography burned into her nightmares. She had walked this ground before, 2 years ago, in a life that officially no longer existed. Preacher rode beside her, checking her weapon for the 3rd time. "You're quiet this morning. Just focused." The convoy threaded through the foothills, climbing toward the pass that connected their sector to Firebase Phoenix. Radio chatter was minimal, professional, the clipped communications of Marines who understood that today could turn violent without warning. Alara watched the terrain scroll past. There, the boulder formation where Corporal Reyes had taken cover. There, the dry stream bed where she had dragged Sergeant Okonkwo to safety. There, the ridge where the enemy machine gun had pinned them for 40 minutes while she crawled through open ground to flank it. Ghosts everywhere. Some landscapes never let you forget. The valley narrowed ahead, high walls rising on both sides. The choke point she had warned about in the briefing. Alara keyed her radio. Tailgunner to lead. Approaching the kill zone. Recommend increased speed and spacing. Rennick's voice came back hard. Maintain current formation. We do not panic based on speculation. 30 seconds later, the first RPG streaked down from the eastern ridge. The explosion caught the second vehicle, flipping it onto its side in a bloom of fire and dust. Automatic weapons fire erupted from 3 positions simultaneously, rounds hammering into the convoy from elevated angles. This was not harassment. This was a coordinated assault designed to destroy them. Alara was moving before the echoes faded. She exited the vehicle low, using the engine block for cover, her rifle already tracking targets. The enemy had learned from yesterday. They were dug in deeper, firing from fortified positions, using the terrain exactly as she had feared. A fragment of memory surfaced unbidden. The same sounds, the same angles. Corporal Hassan screaming as shrapnel tore through his leg. The weight of bodies she could not save. She pushed the memory down and focused on the present. Lance Corporal Volkov had frozen beside the disabled vehicle, exposed to fire from the western ridge. A fighter was drawing a bead on him, the barrel of an AK tracking toward his unprotected back. Alara did not think. She moved. She covered 20 meters of open ground in a sprint that left no time for fear, grabbed Volkov by his vest, and threw them both behind a rock outcropping as rounds sparked off the stone where he had been standing. The fighter who had targeted him jerked backward as Alara's return fire found him. "Stay down," she told Volkov. "Do not move until I tell you." His eyes were wide with shock, but he nodded. She moved again, repositioning to a spot where she could see both ridges. The Marines were fighting back now, the initial chaos resolving into organized resistance, but they were pinned. The enemy held the high ground and knew it. Alara steadied her breathing. She found the enemy machine gun position, calculated windage and elevation, and fired 3 times. The gun went silent. From the corner of her eye, she saw a combat cameraman, a specialist attached to document operations, raising his camera toward her. She shifted position immediately, keeping her face turned away, letting the movement look tactical rather than evasive. Another memory fragment. The helicopter coming in hot, rotors screaming, bodies lined up for extraction. 7 bags. 7 names she would carry forever. Focus. Present. Now. She identified the enemy commander by the way others oriented toward him, a man on the eastern ridge directing fire with hand signals. 800 meters. Difficult shot with a standard rifle. Not impossible. She found a stable position, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger. The commander dropped. Within seconds, the enemy fire became disorganized. Without leadership, fighters began withdrawing rather than pressing the attack. The ambush collapsed in on itself, surviving enemies melting back into the mountains. The engagement lasted 14 minutes. When silence finally settled over the valley, Alara allowed herself to breathe. Casualties were lighter than they should have been. The overturned vehicle had protected its occupants. One Marine had taken shrapnel to the shoulder, serious but survivable. Know this, the warning she had given, even ignored, had made the convoy approach with enough caution to survive the initial moments. Rennick moved through the aftermath, coordinating medevac and security. His eyes found Alara across the wreckage and held. She saw the questions there, the disbelief, the walls of certainty beginning to crumble. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that would fit his understanding of the world. Later, as they waited for helicopter extraction, Preacher approached Alara with a strange expression. Private Collins was in the second vehicle, Preacher said quietly. The one that flipped. He saw what happened during the firefight. He told me about a shot you took. Alara kept her face neutral. We all took shots. That is how firefights work. He said you dropped an enemy fighter at 800 meters with iron sights. 3 rounds, 1 target, impossible distance with that rifle. Preacher stepped closer. Collins went through scout, sniper screening. He knows what that kind of shooting means. And he knows there is no cultural support team training that teaches it. Collins was disoriented from a blast. You probably saw someone else. Preacher shook her head slowly. I have been watching you for days, Alara. The way you move, the way you read terrain, the way you handle weapon. She paused. You are not who your file says you are. And I think you know exactly what those Iron Wolf stories are really about. Before Alara could respond, Captain Brennan's voice cut across the perimeter. Gunnery, Sergeant Masade. Command post. Now, she found him waiting beside the radio station, his face grave. He held a printed message. Your file has been flagged by higher command, Brennan said. Someone at Camp Leatherneck is asking questions about your assignment here, about your background, about discrepancies in your service record. He looked up. I told you I know when a file does not match the person. Apparently, I'm not the only one who noticed. Alara felt the walls closing in. 2 years of careful anonymity unraveling in a single day. You have until morning to give me answers, Brennan continued. Real ones. Or I send an inquiry up the chain and let them sort out who you really are. The helicopter was coming now, rotors beating the air, dust swirling across the valley where 7 Marines had died 2 years ago, where she had become something that was not supposed to exist. Her cover had hours left at most, and she still had not decided what to do when it finally shattered. Alara never got the chance to answer Captain Brennan. The first mortar round hit the fuel depot at 0317, turning the night into a wall of orange flame. The explosion knocked her sideways, ears ringing, instincts screaming to move. A second round hit near the motor pool, then a third. The alarm sirens wailed to life as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions outside the perimeter wire. All hands to defensive positions, Brennan shouted into the chaos. This is not a probe. They're coming through. Alara grabbed her rifle and ran toward the east wall where the fire was heaviest. The FOB's defensive positions were manned, but taking casualties. Muzzle flashes from the darkness beyond the wire suggesting at least 30 attackers on this sector alone. Someone had given the enemy detailed information about their defenses. The gunner on the east tower went down as she arrived, clutching his shoulder and screaming. The mounted .50 caliber sat silent, its barrel pointed uselessly at the sky. Alara climbed the ladder without thinking. She swung behind the weapon, racked the charging handle, and opened fire in controlled bursts. The .50's thunder rolled across the compound, tracers reaching into the darkness, finding targets. Enemy fighters who had been advancing on the wire scattered for cover. East Tower is back up, she called into the radio. Concentrated assault on sectors 4 through 6. I count 3 dozen minimum. Rennick's voice came back, strained but controlled. All positions hold. Reinforcements moving to East Wall. Below her, a young Marine named Dawson had pressed himself against a barrier, his rifle shaking in his hands. He was 19 years old, 3 weeks in country, facing his first real combat. His eyes had the glazed look of someone whose mind was trying to shut down. "Dawson," Alara shouted down to him. Her voice cut through his paralysis. "Look at me." She waited until his eyes found hers. "You're going to be fine. Your rifle works. Your training works. Pick a sector and engage targets. Nothing else matters right now." "I cannot," he stammered. "I cannot do this." "Yes, you can." Alara fired another burst, dropped 2 fighters trying to breach the wire. "You are a Marine. This is what Marines do. Breathe, aim, squeeze. That is all. Just those 3 things." Something shifted in Dawson's face. His hand steadied. He raised his rifle, found a target, and fired. The shot went wide, but the second one did not. He was fighting now. Alara returned to the 50, sweeping fire across the assault line. The enemy had expected to overwhelm the FOB with speed and violence. They had not expected organized resistance this quickly, but they were not retreating. "A breach," someone shouted. "Southeast corner. They are through the wire." Alara saw it. A dozen fighters pouring through a gap in the perimeter, spreading into the compound. If they reached the command post or the ammunition storage, the FOB was lost. She abandoned the 50 and dropped from the tower, hitting the ground running. 3 Marines fell in behind her without being asked, following her toward the breach. "On me," she commanded, bounding Overwatch. "First team moves, second team covers." We pushed them back to the wire. The counterattack was brutal and close. She led from the front, her rifle barking in short bursts, her movements drawing fire away from the Marines behind her. Room to room, barrier to barrier, they pushed the breach force back toward the gap in the wire. Volkov was beside her now, his fear from the earlier ambush replaced by something harder. He moved when she moved, fired when she called targets. The young Marine who had frozen the valley was becoming something else. They sealed the breach in 11 minutes. The last enemy fighters withdrew into the darkness, dragging their wounded. The assault was broken. In the sudden silence, Alara heard someone calling for a medic. She found Dawson behind the barrier where she had talked him through his fear. He was lying on his back, hands pressed against his stomach, dark blood pooling beneath him. A round had found the gap between his armor plates. She dropped beside him and applied pressure, but she could feel the truth beneath her hands. Too much damage. Too much blood already lost. Dawson looked up at her with eyes that were beginning to fade. "Did I do okay?" The words caught in her throat. She had seen death before. She had held Marines as they died, made promises she could not keep, carried guilt that never got lighter. But this one broke something she thought she had armored over. "You did perfect," she told him. "You stood up when it mattered. You fought when it counted. Your family will know you died a Marine." His hand found hers and squeezed weakly. "Will you tell them? My mom and my sister. Will you tell them I was not scared?" "I will tell them," she whispered. "I promise." Dawson smiled. Then his hand went limp. Alara stayed beside him until the medics came. She did not cry. She had forgotten how. But something in her chest cracked open, a wound that matched all the others she carried, the names and faces that never left her. When she finally stood, Rennick was watching from 10 feet away. His expression held none of the contempt she had come to expect. Instead, there was something else. Recognition. The look of a man who had just watched someone reveal exactly who they were. He said nothing. Neither did she. Some things did not need words. The FOB spent the next hours counting costs and reinforcing defenses. 7 wounded, 2 seriously. 1 dead. Private First Class Dawson, age 19, 3 weeks in country. A boy who had learned to be brave in the last minutes of his life. Alara sat alone behind the motor pool as dawn broke, staring at nothing. Preacher found her there, but did not speak. She simply sat beside her in the silence, offering presence instead of words. The radio squawked in the distance. Someone was coming. Captain Brennan approached them an hour later. His face was grave, but something else flickered behind his eyes. something that looked almost like answers arriving. Just got off secure comms with Camp Leatherneck, he said. Sergeant Major Theodore Achebe is inbound. Arriving this afternoon. Alara's blood went cold. Achebe. She knew that name. She knew exactly why he would remember hers. He requested information about you specifically, Brennan continued. About your file. About the discrepancies. He paused. Whatever is coming, Gunnery Sergeant, I suggest you prepare for it. Because something tells me your cultural support cover is about to become irrelevant. The helicopter would arrive in 6 hours. Alara had 6 hours to decide whether to run or finally stop hiding. 6 hours until the ghost came back to life. The FOB woke to the smell of smoke and the weight of what had been lost. Marines moved through the compound repairing defenses and cataloging damage with the mechanical efficiency of people who had learned to push grief into boxes that could be opened later. Private Dawson's personal effects had been collected and sealed. His bunk was already stripped. The war did not pause for mourning. Alara had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dawson's face, heard his voice asking if he had done okay. Another name for the list she carried. Another promise she would have to keep. Rennick found her at the morning formation. Gunnery Sergeant Masade, he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled Marines. Step forward. She did, keeping her expression neutral as she faced him. Last night you abandoned your assigned position on the East Tower. You led an unauthorized counterattack without orders. You took command of Marines who were not under your authority. His voice hardened. Private Dawson died in that breach. A breach you chose to assault without waiting for proper reinforcement. The accusation hung in the air. Marines shifted uncomfortably, uncertain where this was going. Alara kept her voice level. The breach was expanding. Every second we waited meant more fighters inside the wire. I made a tactical decision based on the situation. You made a decision that was not yours to make. Rennick stepped closer. Support personnel do not lead combat operations. Support personnel do not abandon defensive positions. Support personnel follow orders and stay out of the way. With respect, Master Sergeant, if I had stayed on that tower, the breach would have overwhelmed the southeast sector. More Marines would have died. Rennick's face reddened. You do not get to decide who lives and who dies. That is not your call. It was last night. The words landed like a slap. Rennick's hands clenched at his sides. Preacher stepped forward from the formation. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. Master Sergeant, she said, I was on the east wall. I saw what happened. She looked around at the assembled Marines. Gunnery Sergeant Masade took over the 50 cal after Corporal Peters went down. She broke the assault on our sector. Then she led 4 Marines to seal a breach that would have cost us the FOB. She paused, letting the words settle. Private Dawson died fighting. He died because he stood up when it mattered instead of freezing like he did in the valley. And the only reason he found that courage was because she talked him through his fear. Preacher turned back to Rennick. I do not know who she really is, but know what I saw. And what I saw was a Marine saving lives. The silence stretched. Then Volkov stepped forward. She saved my life in the valley, he said. His voice was quiet but steady. When I froze, she pulled me to cover and dropped the fighter who was about to kill me. He looked at Rennick. I would not be standing here if not for her. Other Marines shifted, exchanging glances. The formation was fracturing along lines of loyalty and observation. Rennick looked like a man watching foundations crack beneath his feet. He opened his mouth to respond, but Captain Brennan's voice cut him off. That is enough. Brennan strode into the formation, his expression brooking no argument. We have more pressing concerns than assigning blame for a battle we won. He gestured for the senior personnel to follow him toward the command post. Inside, a map had been covered with new markers showing enemy positions and movement patterns. Intelligence analysis of last night's attack, Brennan said. The enemy knew our defensive layout. Guard rotations. Weak points in the wire. He looked around the room. Someone gave them detailed information about this FOB. Eyes turned toward Alara. The outsider. The unknown. The woman whose file did not match who she was. She felt the suspicion gathering like storm clouds. If I was feeding information to the enemy, Alara said calmly. Why would I fight to defend this position? Why would I seal the breach instead of letting them through? Brennan held up a hand. We have a prisoner. One of the fighters captured during the breach. He has been resistant to interrogation. Alara understood immediately. You want me to try? The prisoner was held in a reinforced storage container near the motor pool. He was young, maybe 22, with the hard eyes of someone who had been fighting since childhood. He spat at the feet of the Marines guarding him. Alara entered alone. She sat across from him and began speaking in Pashto, not Dari. A different dialect, a different tribal affiliation. She spoke of his family's region, the specific valleys where his accent said he had grown up. She spoke of the commander she had dropped at 800 meters, described him in detail. The prisoner's face changed. Fear replaced defiance. Within 20 minutes, she had extracted the intelligence chain. A local informant in the village they had visited. Payments routed through Pakistan. No connection to anyone inside the FOB. She delivered the information to Brennan with professional detachment. The suspicion evaporated, but the questions did not. Rennick found her alone outside the command post an hour later. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the compound, and for once his face held no hostility, only exhaustion. My brother served here, he said quietly. 18 months ago, he was killed in an attack on this FOB. An attack that should have been stopped. Alara said nothing. She waited. The investigation said there was a weak link in the defense. Someone who froze. Someone who did not do their job. Rennick's voice cracked almost imperceptibly. I've spent every day since then making sure that no one under my command becomes that weak link. Making sure no one else dies because someone was not ready. You think women are the weak link. I think anyone I cannot trust is a risk I cannot take. He looked at her directly. But you are not what I thought you were. I do not know what you are, but you're not weak. It was not an apology. It was not acceptance. But it was something Alara could have pressed, could have thrown his prejudice back in his face. Instead, she saw the grief beneath the armor, the brother he could not save, the guilt that drove his cruelty. We all carry ghosts, she said. The trick is not letting them turn us into something we cannot live with. Rennick held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked away. The helicopter appeared on the horizon at 14:30 hours. Alara watched it approach, her heart beating steady despite what was coming. Sergeant Major Theodore Achebe. She had not seen him in 2 years. Not since Operation Crimson Dawn. Not since he had been one of the Marines she carried out of that valley. The helicopter touched down and a tall figure emerged, moving with the deliberate authority of someone who had spent 3 decades earning respect. Achebe crossed the compound, shaking hands with Brennan, exchanging words with Rennick. Then his eyes found Alara. He went still. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by something that looked almost like wonder. He nodded once, slowly, deliberately, and Alara knew that whatever came next, the ghost was about to speak. Sergeant Major Achebe disappeared into Captain Brennan's office and did not emerge for 2 hours. The FOB hummed with speculation. Marines gathered in small groups, trading theories about why a sergeant major from Camp Leatherneck would visit a remote outpost the day after a major attack. Some thought it was an inspection. Others suspected a classified operation. A few whispered that someone was in trouble. Preacher found Alara near the motor pool, watching the command post from a distance. You know him, Preacher said. It was not a question. The way he looked at you when he landed. That was recognition. Alara did not answer. Who are you really? Preacher's voice was quiet, insistent. I have watched you fight. I have seen what you can do. And now a sergeant major flies in from Leatherneck and looks at you like he has seen a ghost. Maybe he has. Before Preacher could respond, a runner approached. Gunnery Sergeant Masadeh. Sergeant Major Achebe requests your presence in the briefing room. Alone, Alara straightened her uniform and walked toward the command post. Every step felt like walking toward a door she had kept locked for 2 years. Whatever waited on the other side, there would be no going back. The briefing room was empty except for Achebe. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the mountains that had taken so much from both of them. Close the door, he said without turning. She did. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Achebe turned to face her. His eyes held the weight of memory. "The last time I saw you," he said slowly, "you were carrying Sergeant Okonkwo across 400 meters of open ground while enemy rounds kicked up dirt at your feet. I took 3 bullets that day. You took 2, and then you went back for others." Alara kept her voice steady. "That was a long time ago. 2 years." Achebe stepped closer. 2 years since Operation Crimson Dawn. 2 years since you saved my life and 11 others. 2 years since they told the world you were dead. The official report served its purpose. Its purpose? Achebe let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Its purpose was to protect you. To protect the operations that depended on our enemies believing Iron Wolf no longer existed. He shook his head. "But here you are, alive, operating under a cover identity at a FOB in the same province where you supposedly died. Why?" Alara met his gaze. "Because I could not stay dead while Marines were dying." The words hung between them. Achebe studied her face, reading the truth there. "You found a way back in," he said. "New identity, new assignment, cultural support team." He almost smiled. "You are the worst cultural support specialist I have ever heard of." The cover worked until it did not. Achebe moved to the table where a classified folder sat unopened. "The attacks on this FOB. The ambush on your convoy. The coordinated assault last night. They are all connected. A new commander has consolidated enemy forces in this region. He has been targeting American positions with intelligence and tactical precision we have not seen in years." Alara felt the pieces clicking together. Someone trained him. Someone taught him everything we know about counterinsurgency. Achebe opened the folder and spread photographs across the table. "His name is Masoud Karimi, former Afghan National Army. Defected 18 months ago." He paused. "He was trained by American Special Operations Forces. By MARSOC specifically." Alara looked at the photographs. The face was unfamiliar, but the tactics were not. The ambush patterns, the assault coordination, the intelligence gathering. All of it bore the fingerprints of American doctrine turned against its creators. "You need someone who can match him," she said. "I need Iron Wolf." Achebe's voice was firm. "We have a window. 72 hours before he relocates. A small team, surgical insertion, eliminate the command structure. The kind of operation you built your legend on. And you want me to lead it. There is no one else. The operators available do not know this terrain like you do. They do not speak the language. They do not have your experience against this specific type of target." Achebe leaned forward. "But Iron Wolf cannot lead this mission from behind a cover identity. These Marines need to know who they are following." The weight of the decision pressed down on her. 2 years of hiding. 2 years of being no one. 2 years of carrying her legend like a secret that could never be spoken. "If I reveal myself, that protection is gone. Every enemy who wanted me dead will know I am alive. Yes, and the Marines who follow me into that valley might not come back. Also yes." Achebe's expression softened slightly. "But they will follow the truth, not a lie wrapped in a borrowed name." The door opened. Rennick stood in the entrance, his face a mask of frustration. "Sergeant Major, with respect, I have a right to know what is happening in my FOB. There are operations being discussed, and I am being excluded." Achebe regarded him calmly. "Master Sergeant Rennick, your concerns are noted. This woman has been operating under my command with a file full of lies." Rennick pointed at Alara. "Whatever she really is, I need to know. My Marines need to know." Achebe looked at Alara. The question was in his eyes. The decision was hers. She thought of Dawson dying in her arms, of Volkov standing up in formation to defend her, of Preacher challenging Rennick when silence would have been easier, of all the Marines who had fought beside her without knowing who they were fighting with. They deserved the truth. "Call assembly," she said quietly. "All personnel." Achebe nodded. He turned to Rennick. "You want to know who she is, Master Sergeant? You are about to find out." 20 minutes later, every Marine at FOB Kogyani stood in formation. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the compound. Alara stood beside Achebe at the front, her heart pounding against her ribs. Rennick's eyes were fixed on her, waiting. Preacher stood in the second row, her expression unreadable. Volkov was near the back, the young Marine who had grown from frightened boy to someone who stood when it mattered. Achebe stepped forward. His voice carried across the silent assembly. What I am about to tell you is classified, but given the operation ahead, you have earned the right to know. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. 2 years ago, a Marine was officially listed as killed in action. This was done deliberately, to protect ongoing operations and to shield that Marine from enemies who had placed a price on her head. He turned toward Alara. That Marine stands before you now. Murmurs rippled through the formation. Rennick's face had gone pale. Achebe continued. Some of you have heard stories. Legends about a female operator who did things that were not supposed to be possible. Who saved 200 lives in a single operation. Who earned a call sign that became a symbol for every woman who followed her into the Corps. His voice rose, filling the compound. Iron Wolf, stand ready. Iron Wolf, stand ready. The words rolled across the compound like thunder before lightning. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Alara stepped forward. The woman who moved was not the cultural support specialist who had arrived at FOB Kogyani days ago. That woman had been a shell, a disguise worn out of necessity. What emerged now was something else entirely. Her posture shifted, her chin lifted. Her eyes swept the formation with the calm assessment of someone who had commanded Marines in places that did not exist on any map. She spoke, and her voice carried a weight it had not held before. My name is Gunnery Sergeant Alara Masadeh. Call sign Iron Wolf. I served with Marine Special Operations Command for 6 years before my death was staged to protect ongoing operations. Everything you have heard about me is true, and some of what you have heard does not come close to the truth. The silence was absolute. Marines stared at her like she had materialized from legend into flesh. Volkov's face held pure awe, the expression of someone watching a myth step off the page. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Preacher stood rigid in formation, her eyes glistening. Vindication burned there, and something deeper. Pride. She had defended a woman she did not truly know, and that woman had turned out to be more than anyone imagined. Rennick looked like a man whose world had cracked open. The color had drained from his face. His hands hung loose at his sides. Every assumption he had built, every certainty he had wielded like a weapon, lay shattered at his feet. 2 years ago, Alara continued, I led a team into these mountains on a mission designated Operation Crimson Dawn. Our objective was to eliminate a high-value target coordinating attacks across 3 provinces. Intelligence indicated minimal resistance. She paused. The memory was a wound that never fully closed. Intelligence was wrong. The flashback took her then, vivid as the day it happened. The night had been moonless, perfect for infiltration. 12 operators moving through terrain they had studied for weeks. Alara on point, reading the darkness with senses honed by years of training. The target compound lay 2 kilometers ahead. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Then the first explosion tore the night apart. The ambush was devastating. Enemy fighters had known they were coming, had prepared positions that turned the approach into a kill zone. Within seconds, 4 of her team were down. Rounds snapped past her head as she dove for cover, already calculating angles and options. The radio was chaos. Men screaming, calls for support that could not arrive in time. The mission had become a survival situation in the span of a heartbeat. Alara took command. She organized the survivors into defensive positions, directed fire to suppress enemy movement, and called in coordinates for air support that she knew would take too long. 2 more Marines fell in the first 10 minutes. The enemy was closing in. We were pinned in a valley with no extraction route, she told the assembled Marines. Air support was 40 minutes out. We had 7 wounded who could not move under their own power, and enemy fighters were advancing from 3 directions. The choice had been impossible. Stay together and die, or someone goes out alone and creates enough chaos to buy time. Alara had gone alone. She moved through the darkness like something that belonged there. Her rifle spoke in controlled bursts, each shot finding its mark. She flanked the Eastern Assault Force and collapsed their position with grenades she had taken from fallen enemies. She circled to the north and eliminated their machine gun nest with a knife when her ammunition ran low. For 90 minutes, she became the thing they whispered about, the wolf in the darkness, the ghost that killed without being seen. I drew their attention away from the wounded, she said. I made them hunt me instead of finishing the assault on our position. By the time air support arrived, I had reduced their effective fighting force by half. But the cost? The cost was 7 names she would carry forever. We extracted 200 Marines that night from positions that would have been overrun without the time I bought. She swallowed hard. But 7 of my team did not make it home. 7 Marines died because intelligence failed, and I could not be everywhere at once. The flashback released her. She stood again in the FOB compound, surrounded by living faces instead of ghosts. I was awarded the Navy Cross in a classified ceremony. Then I was officially killed to protect the sources and methods that had been compromised. For 2 years, Iron Wolf has been dead. She looked across the formation. Until now, Achebe stepped forward, the enemy commander coordinating attacks in this region trained with American forces. He knows our tactics. He knows our doctrine. He has been using that knowledge to kill Marines with precision we have not seen in years. His voice hardened. In 72 hours, he will relocate to a position we cannot reach. We have one window to eliminate him and his command structure. One chance to end the threat he poses. Achebe turned to Alara. Iron Wolf will lead this mission. Those who follow her will be volunteers only. Because the operation we are planning makes Crimson Dawn look simple. The words settled over the formation like a weight. Alara looked at the faces before her. Young Marines, experienced operators, men and women who had fought beside her without knowing who she was. They had seen her bleed. They had watched her lead. They had heard her legend, and now they saw the truth. I will not lie to you, she said. This mission is dangerous. Some of us may not come back, but the Marines at Firebase Phoenix and every other outpost in this region are counting on us to remove a threat that will otherwise continue killing Americans for years. She straightened to her full height. The uncertain liaison was gone forever. In her place stood Iron Wolf. I need volunteers. I need Marines willing to follow me into those mountains knowing what we face. She paused. But I promise you this. I will bring back everyone I can. And those we lose will not be forgotten. The silence held for 3 seconds. Then Volkov stepped forward. I volunteer. Preacher moved a heartbeat later. Count me in. One by one, Marines stepped forward. Sergeant Ottera, Corporal Cattery, others whose names she was still learning. They stepped toward her, toward the mission, toward whatever waited in those mountains. Rennick stood frozen as his Marines moved past him. Then something shifted in his face. The walls he had built crumbled completely. He stepped forward. If my Marines are going, he said quietly, then I'm going with them. Alara met his eyes. She saw the journey there. From contempt to confusion to something that looked almost like respect. She nodded once. The team was assembled. The mission was set. In 48 hours, they would fly into mountains that had nearly killed her once before. This time, she would not be alone. This time, they would know exactly who was leading them into the darkness. The formation dispersed slowly, Marines drifting away in small groups, conversations hushed and reverent. The world had shifted beneath their feet, and they were still finding their balance. Alara remained at the front of the compound, watching them go. The weight of revelation sat heavy on her shoulders. 2 years of silence, broken. 2 years of hiding, ended. Iron Wolf walked in daylight again. Achebe stood beside her. You did the right thing. Ask me again after the mission. He nodded and moved toward the command post to coordinate logistics. Alara stayed where she was, letting the afternoon sun warm skin that felt cold despite the heat. The memories of Crimson Dawn still lingered. Not just the combat, but what came after. The extraction helicopter had arrived at dawn, rotors beating the air into submission. She had carried Sergeant Achebe to the bird herself, his blood soaking through her uniform. Then she had gone back. 3 more trips across open ground, each one slower than the last, her own wounds screaming with every step. When the last survivor was loaded, she had collapsed against the helicopter's frame and looked back at the valley. 7 body bags lay in a row, waiting for transport. 7 Marines who had trusted her to bring them home. The flight to Kandahar was a blur of blood loss and morphine. She woke 3 days later to find a colonel standing beside her bed. Operation Crimson Dawn has been classified at the highest levels, he had said. The intelligence failure that led to the ambush traces back to a compromised source. That source is still active, still feeding information to enemy networks. She had understood immediately. If the enemy knew Iron Wolf survived, they would know their source was compromised. They would disappear, and the chance to identify and eliminate the leak would vanish. So she had died, officially, permanently, completely, a star on a wall at Langley, a classified citation she could never display, a legend that grew in whispers while she became no one. For 2 years, she had watched from the shadows as other Marines fought and died in wars she could not join, until the weight of that silence became heavier than the risk of resurrection. She had found a way back in, new identity, new assignment, and now, standing in this FOB compound, she was herself again. The cost of that choice remained to be seen. Rennick found her an hour later, near the ammunition depot where she was inspecting equipment for the mission. He approached slowly, like a man walking towards something he did not fully understand. "Gunnery Sergeant," he said. His voice lacked the edge it had carried for days. "Can we speak?" She set down a magazine she was checking. "Go ahead." He struggled with the words. She could see him wrestling with pride and prejudice and the ruins of everything he thought he knew. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About you. About what you were capable of. About what women in combat roles could be." He paused. "I let my grief turn into something ugly. I looked at you and saw everything I was afraid of instead of what was actually there." Alara waited. This was not a moment for her to speak. "My brother died because of chaos," Rennick continued. "Because combat is chaos, and sometimes people die no matter how prepared you are. I spent 18 months blaming everyone except the enemy who pulled the trigger." He met her eyes. "You're not what I blamed you for. You're the opposite of it. I know why you built those walls," Alara said quietly. "I have walls of my own." Rennick nodded slowly. "On this mission, whatever you need, I follow your lead. No questions. No secongisin." He straightened. "You have earned that. It was not friendship. It was not absolution. But it was respect, hard-won and freely given." The mission briefing convened at 1900 hours. Alara stood at the front of the room, maps and satellite imagery spread before her. The volunteers filled every seat, their attention focused with an intensity that had not existed days ago. They looked at her differently now, not as an outsider or a liability, as a leader. "Karimi's compound is here," she said, pointing to a cluster of buildings in a mountain valley. Defensive positions on 3 approaches. Estimated 40 fighters plus his command element. She traced routes on the map. "We insert by helicopter at this landing zone for kilometers out. Movement to objective under cover of darkness. Assault at 0400 when alertness is lowest." She outlined the team assignments, fire positions, contingencies. Her voice was calm and certain, each word carrying the weight of experience bought in blood. Questions came, and they were different than before. Respectful, tactical, Marines seeking to understand her vision rather than challenge her authority. Sergeant Ottera raised his hand. "Rules of engagement on the approach. Weapons cold until we reach phase line alpha. No contact before we are in position. If we are compromised early, we abort and extract." She looked around the room. "This mission succeeds through precision, not firepower. We go in quiet, we eliminate the target, we disappear." The briefing continued for 2 hours. When it ended, Marines dispersed to prepare their equipment with renewed purpose. Preacher lingered after the others left. "Can I say something?" she asked. Alara nodded. When I came to this FOB 3 months ago, I thought I was alone. Preacher's voice was steady, but emotion flickered beneath. I thought being a woman in a combat unit meant fighting two wars at once. The enemy outside the wire and the doubt inside it. She stepped closer. Then you arrived. And even before I knew who you were, I saw something different. Someone who moved through the resistance like it did not exist. Someone who proved what was possible just by being present. Alara felt the weight of those words. What you did, Preacher continued. Not just Crimson Dawn, but everything. Coming back when you could have stayed hidden. Leading when you could have stayed silent. She paused. It matters. To me. To every woman who comes after us. It matters more than you know. Alara reached out and gripped Preacher's shoulder. Then we make sure this mission succeeds. We make sure the story continues. Preacher nodded, her jaw set with determination. The night before the mission, Alara walked the perimeter one final time. Equipment was staged. Teams were briefed. Everything that could be prepared had been prepared. Volkov found her at the edge of the compound, looking toward the mountains that waited in darkness. Gunnery Sergeant, he said. He stood beside her, no longer the frightened boy who had frozen in an ambush. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Are you scared? Alara considered the question. The honest answer was complicated. Fear lived in her always, a companion she had learned to walk beside rather than flee from. Terrified, she said. Every time. Volkov looked surprised. But you do it anyway. Fear means you understand stakes. She turned to face him. It means you know what can go wrong, and you choose to move forward despite that knowledge. The people who are not afraid are the ones who get others killed. Volkov absorbed this. Then how do you keep going? Alara looked back at the mountains. Because the alternative is letting fear win. And I have never been good at losing. The helicopter would launch at 0100. 7 hours until they flew into those peaks. 7 hours until Iron Wolf hunted again. She thought of Dawson, who had found courage in his final moments. Of the 7 who had not come home from Crimson Dawn. Of everyone counting on her to bring this team back alive. Tomorrow, they would fly into mountains that had nearly killed her once. This time, she would bring everyone home. Or die trying. The helicopters lifted off at 0100, rotors cutting through darkness as they climbed toward the mountain passes. Alara sat in the lead aircraft, her team arranged around her in the red glow of cabin lights. No one spoke. Words were unnecessary now. Every Marine knew the mission. Every Marine knew what was at stake. She studied their faces in the dim light. Preacher checking her rifle one final time. Volkov breathing slowly, controlling the fear she had taught him to carry. Rennick watching the mountains approach with the steady gaze of a man who had found his footing again. Sergeant Ottera, Corporal Cattery, others who had stepped forward when she asked for volunteers. Her team, her responsibility, her promise to bring home. The landing zone appeared below, a flat clearing surrounded by rocky terrain. The pilot flared and touched down, and Alara was moving before the skids fully settled. She hit the ground in a crouch, rifle up, scanning for threats. Her team flowed out behind her with practiced efficiency. Clear, she said into her radio. All teams moved to Rally Point Alpha. They melted into the darkness. The 4-kilometer approach to the target compound required 3 hours of careful movement. Alara led from the front, reading the terrain by starlight, sensing the places where enemy observation posts might lurk. Twice she halted the column, waiting motionless while distant figures passed along ridgelines above them. Her instincts were singing. The mountains felt alive with threat, but she had learned long ago to move through danger rather than away from it. At the 2-kilometer mark, they encountered their first obstacle, an enemy patrol for fighters moving along the route they needed to cross. Alara raised her fist, and her team froze instantly. She watched the patrol through her scope. Their pattern was predictable, their alertness low. Amateurs. She signaled Ottera forward. 2 targets each. Simultaneous. On my mark. They waited until the patrol reached the optimal position. Alara breathed out slowly. Mark. For shots. For bodies dropping. The sound of suppressed rifles barely louder than the wind. Move, Alara commanded. They crossed the danger area and continued toward the objective. The compound emerged from darkness an hour before dawn. A cluster of stone buildings surrounded by fighting positions, exactly as intelligence had indicated. Alara counted sentries and mapped their patterns while her team established assault positions. Rennick's voice came through her earpiece, low and professional. Alpha team in position. Ready on your command. Bravo team set. Preacher added. Alara, check her watch. 0350. 10 minutes until the assault. Then everything went wrong. A dog began barking near the compound's eastern wall. Flashlights flickered to life. Voices shouted in Pashto. Someone had found something, a footprint perhaps, or disturbed ground. The enemy was waking up. They are alerting. Ottera hissed. We need to move now or abort. Alara's mind raced through options. A frontal assault against an alerted enemy would cost lives. Withdrawal meant Karimi would relocate and disappear. Neither choice was acceptable. Then she saw it. A drainage culvert running beneath the compound's northern wall. Large enough for one person, leading directly into the interior. New plan, she said into her radio. Alpha and Bravo teams maintain positions. Suppressive fire on my signal. I'm going through the culvert. Rennick's voice came back immediately. That is suicide. You will be alone inside with 40 fighters. Not for long. When I reach the command building, I will mark the target. You assault through the confusion. She paused. Trust me. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Rennick spoke again. We trust you. Go. Alara moved. She crossed the open ground in a low sprint, reaching the culvert entrance as shouts continued inside the compound. The tunnel was tight and dark, filled with cold water that soaked through her uniform. She pulled herself forward on elbows and knees, her rifle dragging behind her. The culvert opened into a courtyard. She emerged silently, dripping, and pressed against a wall. Fighters were running toward the eastern perimeter, responding to the alert. None looked toward the shadows where she waited. She moved through the compound like a ghost. Every corner cleared, every threat assessed. The training that had made her Iron Wolf taking over completely. The command building was a 2-story structure at the compound center. Light flickered in an upper window. Karimi. Alara keyed her radio. Target building marked. Assault in 30 seconds. She breached the door as the first shots erupted outside. Her team was moving, drawing attention, creating chaos. Inside, she climbed stairs with her rifle raised, clearing rooms, dropping fighters who emerged from doorways. Karimi was in the upper room, reaching for a weapon when she entered. He froze when he saw her face. Iron Wolf, he said in English. The disbelief in his voice was almost satisfying. You are dead. Rumors of my death, she replied, and fired twice. The compound fell in 11 minutes. Alara's teams swept through with precision, eliminating resistance, securing prisoners, gathering intelligence. By the time the sun crested the mountains, the objective was secured. But extraction would not be clean. Enemy reinforcements were approaching from the south. The helicopters were 20 minutes out. They would have to fight their way to the landing zone. Alara organized the withdrawal. Fire teams leapfrogging toward the extraction point, wounded carried by those who could still run. She positioned herself at the rear, covering the retreat with controlled bursts that dropped pursuers before they could close the distance. Rennick appeared beside her, firing at movement on their flank. You should be with the main element. Last one out, she said. That is how I lead. He nodded and kept firing. The helicopters arrived in a storm of rotor wash and suppressive fire from door gunners. Marines piled aboard while Alara held the perimeter, her rifle barking until the magazine ran dry. She loaded her last one and kept shooting. Gunnery Sergeant, the pilot shouted. We are leaving. She sprinted for the bird, bullets kicking dirt at her heels, and threw herself through the door as it lifted off. Hands grabbed her, pulled her inside, and then they were climbing away from the mountains and the enemy and the compound that would never threaten another Marine. She lay on the helicopter floor, breathing hard, and counted heads. Every face she had brought into those mountains was present, wounded but alive. Every single one. The return to FOB Kogyani was triumphant, but Alara did not celebrate. She moved through her team, checking wounds, speaking quiet words, making sure each Marine knew they had performed beyond expectation. Only when the last one had been seen did she allow herself to sit. Preacher found her outside the aid station as the sun climbed higher. "You did it," Preacher said. "You brought everyone home. We did it." Alara looked at her friend. "I could not have done it without you. Without any of them." Preacher sat beside her. "Whatever comes next, I want you to know, this changed things for all of us." Achebe approached before Alara could respond. His expression was unreadable. "I just received orders from Leatherneck," he said. "Your cover is being restored. Officially, Iron Wolf remains dead, but Command wants you back in the field, leading teams like this one." He paused. "You have a choice. Return to the shadows and continue the work, or step into the light permanently and accept whatever comes with that." Alara looked at the FOB around her, at Marines who had followed her into darkness and emerged transformed, at Preacher and Volkov and even Rennick, who had become something different through knowing her. The choice was not as simple as it seemed, but she knew what she wanted. She had always known. The morning after the mission, FOB Kogyani felt like a different place. The tension that had gripped the compound for weeks had lifted, replaced by something lighter. Marines moved with renewed purpose, their conversations carrying the easy confidence of people who had faced the worst and survived. Alara stood before Captain Brennan in his office, the same plywood box where he had first questioned her identity. Now he looked at her with undisguised respect. "The official report credits the mission's success to a joint operations team," Brennan said. "Your name does not appear anywhere in the documentation." Alara nodded. "That is how it has to be. But I want you to know that I have submitted a separate classified recommendation." Brennan leaned forward. "Whatever happens with your cover status, the people who matter will know what you did here, what you have always done." She accepted this with a slight inclination of her head. Some recognition had to remain invisible. She had made peace with that long ago. Achebe was waiting outside when she emerged. His question from the previous night still hung between them. "I have made my decision," she said. He waited. "I will return to operations, but not from the shadows." She looked across the compound at Marines who had bled beside her. "I spent 2 years being no one, watching others fight while I pretended to be dead." She paused. "I cannot do that again. Whatever comes with being visible, I will face it." Achebe studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I will inform Command. There will be consequences. Enemies who thought you were dead will know otherwise. Let them come." Her voice was steady. "I am done hiding from ghosts." The debrief assembled the full team one final time. Alara stood at the front, but this time she was not giving orders. She was saying goodbye. "What you accomplished in those mountains will never be publicly recognized," she told them. "There will be no medals you can display, no stories you can tell outside these walls. But I need you to know that it mattered. Every decision you made, every risk you took, every moment you trusted me to lead you. It mattered." She looked at each face in turn. Volkov stood near the back, but he was not hiding anymore. The frightened boy who had frozen in an ambush had become someone else entirely. When her eyes met his, he straightened with quiet pride. "Corporal Volkov," she said. "Step forward." He did, uncertain what was coming. "When I arrived at this FOB, you were the first person to show me kindness. You thanked me for something small when everyone else looked away." She reached out and gripped his shoulder. "You have become a Marine that others will follow. Do not forget that." Volkov's eyes glistened, but he held her gaze. "I will not forget anything you taught me, Gunnery Sergeant." She turned to Preacher next. Her friend stood with arms crossed, emotion barely contained beneath a professional exterior. "Staff Sergeant Preacher, you defended me before you knew who I was. You stood up when silence would have been easier." Alara's voice softened. "The Corps needs more leaders like you. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Preacher nodded once, sharply. "If I ever get my own command, it is because of what I learned watching you." Finally, Alara faced Rennick. The Master Sergeant stood rigid, his expression a complex mixture of emotions he was still learning to process. The contempt that had defined their early interactions was gone completely, replaced by something harder to name. Master Sergeant Rennick, Ilara said. You, and I did not start well. A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the assembled Marines. But when it mattered, you followed. You trusted. You put aside everything you thought you knew, and you led your team with honor. She extended her hand. That is not easy. I respect it. Rennick looked at her hand for a moment. Then he took it. If you ever need support, he said quietly, my team will be there. Whatever you are facing, wherever you are going. You call and we come. It was not friendship. It was something older and perhaps more valuable. The bond between warriors who had seen each other clearly and chosen respect over resentment. The helicopter arrived at 1400 hours. Ilara walked across the same landing zone where she had arrived days ago, her pack over her shoulder, her rifle slung across her chest. The same dust swirled around her boots. The same mountains loomed in the distance. But everything else had changed. Marines she passed nodded to her now. Some called out words of thanks or farewell. A few snapped in formal salutes that regulations did not require but honor demanded. She paused at the edge of the landing zone and turned back for one last look. Preacher stood near the operations building, watching her go. Volkov had climbed onto a barrier for a better view. Rennick stood apart from the others, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but his presence unmistakable. They had been strangers a week ago. Some had been adversaries. Now, they were something else. Not quite family, but close enough. The kind of bond forged in fire and sealed in blood. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about what resonated most. Tell us about someone you know who was underestimated and proved everyone wrong. Or share a time when you finally let people see who you really were. Ilara climbed into the helicopter and settled into her seat. The rotors spun up, the aircraft lifted, and FOB Kogyani fell away beneath her. She watched until it disappeared behind the mountains, a small outpost in a vast landscape, unremarkable to anyone who did not know what had happened there. For 2 years, she had been a ghost, a name on a memorial wall, a legend whispered in barracks and training facilities, growing larger with each retelling while the woman behind it shrank into nothing. She had chosen that death to protect others, had worn invisibility like armor, believing that being no one was the price of keeping people safe. But she understood now what that choice had cost her. Not just identity, but connection, purpose, the simple truth of being seen by others and seeing them in return. Iron Wolf had been a weapon. Ilara Masadeh was something more. The helicopter carried her toward whatever came next. New missions, new teams, new opportunities to lead Marines into darkness and bring them back to light. There would be enemies who learned she was alive. There would be consequences for stepping out of the shadows. There would be risks she could not predict and costs she could not foresee. But there would also be this, the memory of Marines who followed her into mountains that should have killed them. The knowledge that she had kept her promise and brought everyone home. The faces of Volkov and Preacher and even Rennick changed by knowing her. Some ghosts were meant to stay buried, but some are meant to rise. The mountains fell away behind her, and Ilara Masadeh flew toward the sun, no longer hiding, no longer invisible, no longer anyone, but exactly who she had always been. Iron Wolf, alive, ready,